Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see all of you this evening. So before we're going to go back into John 11 this evening, before we do so, I need to point something out from our study this morning in Luke 16. It's always good to tell whoever's teaching a lesson if you hear something that they said that's wrong. A very kind Christian did this morning for me. What I said wasn't a huge deal, but it certainly was not correct. For some reason, whenever we got through this account of this rich man and Lazarus, or somewhere in this, I made a comment about how the rich man looked up to heaven, to paradise, across the great gulf, and saw Abraham. And I said something about how did he know that Lazarus was there? Well, that's a very ignorant question, because in verse 23, and in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off. He did see Abraham. I did read that, remembered that. But the second part, and Lazarus in his bosom. So if you heard me say that this morning, you thought, whatever you thought, you thought right. He knew he was there because he looked up and saw him there. Now I guess what I was focused on is he didn't have much of a conversation, or any conversation with Lazarus, but rather with Abraham about and mentioned Lazarus. But he certainly saw Lazarus there in Abraham's bosom, and we mentioned how it seems he's actually there with Abraham, but also maybe even maybe referring to paradise, this place on the other side of eternity, as Abraham's bosom, meaning a place of comfort and rest where Lazarus was. So we won't talk more about Luke 16, and next time I do teach there, I will remember to not make that mistake. But John 11, where we've been, this is Jesus heals or raises Lazarus from the dead here in John 11. This morning we left off right here in verse 17. Now we started talking about this man Thomas, which is also called, and said Thomas, which is also called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. And we left off, I was speaking of, asked who's he talking about dying with? He can't be talking about dying with Lazarus. Lazarus is already dead. And it wouldn't make sense. No, he's referring to dying with Jesus. He's ready to go back to Judea. What was the disciples were terrified to go. Thomas being one of them. But Thomas, although he seems he's pretty sure they may die because of the persecution that awaits them in Judea from the Pharisees, the religious leaders who hated Jesus, he's ready to go and die with Jesus. We talked about conviction this morning in the sermon. Well, Thomas certainly did not lack conviction, at least not here. But I want to say a little more about Thomas. He says here that he's ready to go and die with Jesus. Other places we see Thomas, especially this place we're about to go, he seems like maybe a kind of a pessimistic person. He seems kind of pessimistic, although he is faithful to Jesus. He seems sure he doesn't have any hope. We're going to go down there with Jesus. We're going to die, and we're going to do it. We're not going to complain. We're going to go on. We're going to die with him. But he's pessimistic. He doesn't have much hope, it doesn't seem here. And maybe he wasn't as pessimistic as I'm making him. But that's not necessarily maybe a bad thing in his case. He might have been more of a realist and just looked at things in a different light. But I want to go to a very familiar passage about that we are familiar with about this Thomas. To John chapter 20. We'll just scroll down here to John chapter 20. We see, I mentioned, often he's called Doubting Thomas. And he doesn't seem like Doubting Thomas here. Even though maybe he has a negative attitude about things, he doesn't seem to be Doubting Thomas. He seems to be ready to go and die with Jesus. Whereas we see other places, other disciples, Peter was at one point was not ready to die with Jesus. He was he denied him 3 times. Because he was so terrified of dying with Jesus. Now here in John chapter 20, starting about We'll start here in verse 24. We'll read through this passage here. Verse 24. This is Thomas. This is after Jesus has resurrected, and this is Thomas. So Jesus has appeared to the other apostles, and they told Thomas about him. They tell Thomas about him, about Jesus appearing. Jesus has risen from the dead, and Thomas doesn't take their word for it. That's interesting because and what he mentions that here in the end of this passage, Jesus blessed those who believe on me have not seen me. Well, that certainly includes us and others who lived at that time and after this who never saw Jesus. We believe in Jesus because of the apostles' testimony. We don't have a testimony of seeing Jesus and witnessing his miracles, but they do. They've written it down for us, and we believe because of that, because of the inspired scripture that the apostles wrote down. But here's Thomas. He's not seen Jesus. The other apostles have. He wasn't with them here. We'll start here in verse 24 and see his response. So, verse 24, but Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, that's the same Thomas we're reading about there in John 11, was not with them when Jesus came. The other disciples therefore said unto him, We have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, Except I shall see in his hands the print of his nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. And after 8 days again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst of them, and said, Peace be unto you. Then saith he to Thomas, Reach hither thy fingers. And Jesus appears there miraculously before them, it seems, in the room without opening the door. And behold my hand. So he says there in verse 27, Then saith he to Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands. And reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side. So he knew what Thomas wanted as proof, and he didn't. It's interesting here. I believe it's interesting that he didn't refuse Thomas. He didn't say, No, you see me. That should be good enough for you. Oh, you have little faith. Why do you need to thrust your hand in my side and put your fingers into the holes of my hands? No, he allows him to do this and doesn't seem to rebuke him for it. So he tells him to do this, thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. So he gives him another reason to believe, and he doesn't rebuke him for it. Now, verse 28, And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. Now, certainly Thomas seemed to have not had quite the faith that he needed to have in this moment. But he wanted more evidence, and Jesus gave him that evidence. So maybe there is a case that Thomas was doubting Thomas. You might call him doubting Thomas. But I believe more emphasis is placed upon Thomas' faith than his doubting Jesus. He had some faith in Jesus already, a lot of faith in Jesus already. We learned there in John 11, he was ready to die with Jesus. But now, for some reason, he is doubting a little bit and wants some evidence. And you know, it's interesting, Jesus doesn't expect us to believe without evidence. Having faith is not a blind leap. Rather, we have faith, meaning we know. We know from the Scriptures, and the Scriptures testify of Jesus. There are multiple ways we can not have a blind faith. And Thomas didn't have a blind faith. He didn't have a blind faith. And instead of remembering Thomas for his little doubt he has here, let's remember him for this right here. As soon as he has this evidence he asked for, that Jesus gave him without any question, Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. So there he is, my Lord and my God, that same Thomas that was ready to die with Jesus back there in John 11. And certainly ready to die with Jesus now and into the ministry that he'll go into after Jesus goes back into heaven very shortly after this. Let's finish reading this passage here. Jesus saith unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. And notice that. Why did Thomas believe? Because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. He didn't mention him thrusting his hand into his side or his fingers into the holes in his hand. That seems significant. The other apostles believed without having done that. So maybe it's the case that Thomas would have believed without having done that. Maybe it's the case that this is also for some evidence for us that Thomas did thrust his hand to his side and put his fingers in the holes of his hand so that we can also believe. That's what many of the things in Scripture are, so that we can believe as well. So he says, Jesus said unto him, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen me and yet have believed. And many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. So here's John. Again, I mentioned that this morning, that John wrote these things. In 1 John, St. John wrote the book of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. 1 John 5, in the last several verses, John tells us why he wrote that book. And he wrote that book so that we can believe in Jesus and know that we have assurance of salvation. Well, he tells us here why he writes this book and why he writes these signs, and we get an extra detail here. Many other signs. How many? Countless, because it says, which are not written in this book, the presence of his disciples. So it was a lot of other signs that he did. Now, verse 31, but these are written, that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. So the same reason he wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, or 1 John specifically, he wrote the book of John, the gospel account of John, these things that Jesus did about Jesus so that we can believe in him. Us not seeing Jesus can read the testimony of the apostles and John here and Thomas, what happened here, and we believe in Jesus just the same as they did, having never seen him. Isn't that amazing? We believe we serve the same Jesus and we believe in him just like they did without seeing these signs and these miracles. Why? Because these miracles, these signs confirm this word that we have today. We read that there, Mark 16 and verse 20. So Thomas, that's the same Thomas we're reading about here. He was with Jesus. It doesn't, certainly not a coincidence that that John mentions him in chapter 11 as well. And certainly these things about Thomas are applicable for us to strengthen our faith. So we read about Thomas there in verse 16. Now verse 17. Then when Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. So he's been in the grave for 4 days. So Jesus waited 2 days upon hearing that Lazarus was sick. It seems Lazarus must have died right after Jesus heard about him. They weren't that far away. Maybe it probably took them a couple of days to get there. Maybe it took them more. Maybe they took their time. I'm not sure. But either way, from the time Lazarus died and to the time Jesus gets there, he's been in the grave 4 days, meaning he's been dead for 4 days. Now, verse 18, now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off, which is about 2 miles, just southeast of Jerusalem, a little town southeast of Jerusalem that seems to maybe not be at least named Bethany anymore, maybe just absorbed by the city of Jerusalem today. Verse 19, and many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother, that's Lazarus. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. Now, it doesn't seem that Mary has faith that Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead because of some other things that she says, and that she says here in verse 24 and in verse 39. She's going to say something about the fact that Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days and he's stinking already when Jesus asked to roll that stone away. So, but this she does exemplify a great faith, just like Thomas did, in Jesus, as far as the knowledge they have about Jesus. She believes that whatever he asks, it can be done. It's going to be done. She has great faith in Jesus, and she definitely exemplifies that here in this verse. Now, verse 23, Jesus saith unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. She still doesn't get it. Verse 24, Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Well, what is she talking about, that last day there? Well, that's Judgment Day. That's the last day. Now, we read about different places in Scripture, the last days. And often in the religious world, the last days, anytime it's talked about in Scripture, is confused with the time we live in, and said to mean that the time just before Jesus comes back. We don't have any signs or any way to know how far we've progressed into the last days, meaning how close we are to the return of Jesus. Jesus, in fact, told us no one knows. There wouldn't be any signs. There's not any signs to know when the last days are or when this last day will be. We have to stay faithful and do all we can for Jesus, and certainly constantly anticipate that He is going to return at any moment. But she's talking about the same resurrection that we're looking forward to. The same resurrection that Paul spoke of in 1 Corinthians. The same resurrection that Paul spoke of in 1 Thessalonians. The last day. Whenever we'll meet each other, the saints will meet up together in the air. That resurrection is the resurrection that she's referring to. And the Jews, the faithful Jews, certainly believed in a resurrection. Remember, the Sadducees, that sect of the Jews, they didn't believe in a resurrection. They didn't believe that we would be resurrected again. They didn't believe in an afterlife. They were extremely liberal in their thinking and thought more like the pagans. But Martha here believes in a resurrection. She has faith again. She doesn't understand what Jesus can do here, that He's actually going to resurrect Lazarus here in just a moment. But she does believe that He's going to resurrect everyone on the last day, that is, the same judgment day that we look forward to, she looked forward to. Now, verse 25, Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Jesus said unto her, I am. You could go through the New Testament, and especially John, and you could go through all the different I ams that Jesus said. And then trace that back all the way to Exodus 3, the burning bush, whenever God appeared to Moses in that burning bush, or spoke to Moses rather, in that miraculously burning bush, what did He say? He said, tell them I am sent you, when He asked what to tell them. Because He's the only one that can say that. I am the resurrection. He tells us that He's the light. Here He tells us the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Verse 26, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. He asked her, believest thou this? Now, this and also in John 8:24, we quote that often, speaking of the plan of salvation. You could also quote this verse as well. He told the Pharisees, those religious leaders attacking Him, that if they did not believe in Him, they'll die in their sins. That's what He's referring to here. He's referring to salvation. He's using this as a teaching moment. He's going to raise Lazarus, but here He's talking about something spiritual. He's talking about how those who believe in Him are not going to die spiritually. They're going to live forever. And those who do not, it would imply, are going to die spiritually. But they do not believe in Him. Now verse 27, she saith unto Him, Yea, Lord, I believe that Thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. She made a confession that everyone has to make in order to be saved. Have to confess that Jesus is the Son of God in order to become a Christian. That is one step to become a Christian, just before baptism into Christ. She made the same confession that Peter made. In Matthew 16 and verse 17, Peter said, when he asked Peter, who you say that I am, he said, Thou art the Son, or Thou art the Son of the living God. That's what Peter said. He just added that other detail there. So verse 28, when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary her sister secretly, or in private, saying, The Master is come and calleth for thee. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came unto him. And she knew who that was, the Master. She didn't have any doubt. When she said the Master's coming, she got up and she went. She wanted to see Jesus, who wouldn't. Verse 30, now Jesus was not yet come into the town, but was in that place where Martha had met him. the Jews then which were with her in the house and comforted her. So this is I guess the funeral's over, but we're still looking at a time after the funeral when the family needs comforting. And there's the Jews. This isn't the Jewish leaders who were attacking Jesus. This is her friends. These are those who were there to comfort her, just as we do today when we go and comfort those who have lost a loved one. That she rose up hastily when they saw Mary. That she rose up hastily and went out, followed her, saying, "She goeth unto the grave to weep there." Now, that's what I want to focus on for the little bit of time we have left. This is number one I have here by weep. Number one, first time we see weep. Now let's progress through these different weeps and weeping here. So she goes to weep there. She's mourning there. Or she's going to mourn at the grave. People do that today, mourn at the grave of their lost loved ones. Perfectly normal thing to do. That's what they thought she was doing. She was going with Jesus, actually. Then, when Mary was come where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." Again, Mary now. We read about Martha earlier in her faith. Now Mary displays faith in Jesus. She knew that if Jesus was there, he could have healed Lazarus. But she doesn't understand fully what Jesus is going to do here in a moment. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, there's the second time we see weeping, and the Jews also weeping, there's the third time we see weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Now, the New American Standard Version says he was, I think other versions as well, say he was deeply moved in his spirit. This is his spirit. On the inside, he was deeply moved. Now, Jesus, we see here, we're about to see a glimpse into Jesus' humanity. Maybe even more so than that. Jesus is not disconnected from humanity. Rather he is groaned here. He's deeply moved by this. There's been a death of his very close friend. And his other two close friends here, who are immediate family of his close friend who has died, are weeping and sad. Now he knows that Lazarus is about to be raised, but still, how horrible of a thing is death. And such a deeply moving thing, such an emotional thing, or emotion-causing thing, that even Jesus here is deeply moved, and he is troubled. So these Jews are weeping. They saw her weeping and caused them to weep. We can relate to that, certainly. We see someone else mourning the loss of a loved one, even if maybe we didn't know that loved one, it wasn't our loved one, that can certainly make a person weep just to see someone else that they love mourn the loss of their loved one. Now here's Jesus. He's also becoming emotional over this. Verse 34, and said, "Where have you laid him?" Remember, he's saying this seems through tears. "Lord, come and see." And they said unto him, "Lord, come and see." So they're going direct into this tomb. Now here, this verse, Jesus wept. There's a fourth wept. This time, so we saw back there in verse here we saw Mary weeping there, and we saw here Mary's weeping, and certainly Martha's weeping as well. I believe we could infer from that. And also the Jews, the other people around there who know the family, they're weeping. So there's two people weeping, and then here's Jesus being moved. Jesus is feeling the same thing we feel when we come upon something like this. Maybe even feeling more deeply moved about this because of how much he understands about death and these things. He's feeling the same way we would. He's moved. He's moved to the point of weeping, to tears. And he's not just putting on a show either. He's not just crying so he can relate to them. Oh, they're crying, I better go ahead and cry as well. He's not crying as one of my instructors told us in preaching school. He said he's seen preachers put in their sermon outlines, cry here. And, to get on everybody's good side, I guess, to put on a show with their weeping. No, he is legitimately weeping, crying because of how this has made him filled because of this debt that has happened. So there's 4 weepings there. Mary, the others around them, and here's Jesus. The reason I wanted to focus on that, it seems to me sometimes that in our culture here in America, I don't know where it started. I don't know where it started. We certainly don't see it in the Bible. But often we have an idea that men aren't supposed to cry. Men aren't supposed to show emotion in that way. Well, we don't see that in the Bible. In the Bible, we see very, very strong men crying, weeping, even moaning and wailing at times to express their mourning, their sadness. Think about David, King David. What was he? He was a mighty king, a mighty warrior. He was a mighty warrior, a mighty king. And how often through the Psalms is he crying? Is he crying out to God? And certainly that also means how he's expressing himself. But he's weeping. He has tears. I want to direct our thought to someone else that you may recall. One of the prophets. Certainly, I believe all the prophets were crying at some point. But one of the prophets, Jeremiah, what is he called? The weeping prophet. Now, Jeremiah was anything but some kind of a weak man. Now, Jeremiah was a very strong and very powerful preacher, and he endured a lot of physical torment because of his standing on what God had told him against the sin that was in Jerusalem during his time. He lived through a war and lived through all sorts of horrible things. And over and over again, we see Jeremiah crying. He's crying. He can't stop crying at one point. And is crying out to God because of it, because of the sin of his people, of the people he's preaching to. We see, and who is John the Baptist compared to? And Jesus compared to the prophets. What kind of men were the prophets? Like these were men. These were strong men. So men crying, certainly. Now maybe there would be an instance in which maybe a man shouldn't cry or maybe hold it together at times, but certainly crying, that's something crying being a sign of weakness is something that our culture has decided, our society, somewhere over the years. It's not a principle we find in the scriptures. And the same goes for ladies. Sometimes, ladies will tell each other, and sometimes we'll tell each other that, don't cry, nobody cry. No, we might ought to reverse that. Whenever we're mourning, whenever we need to mourn however we need to. Jesus did here, and Mary did, and the Jews did. They didn't mind weeping in front of one another whenever that time came. And certainly Christians shouldn't mind expressing that emotion that way if that's what needs to be done. That's how it needs to be expressed. Now, we'll read a couple more verses here. So Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, behold how he loved him. So this is a close friend of Jesus. And some of them said, could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? And Jesus therefore again groaning in himself cometh to the grave. There was a cave, a stone lay upon it. That's an ancient grave here. Jesus said, take ye away the stone. Martha and the sister of him that was dead saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh. He's been in there for 4 days. Verse 40, Jesus saith unto her, said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God. That's why he's going to do this. Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. So there again, this miracle, what's going on, the things he's saying, the progression he's making, it's so that all these people can believe and so that us reading today can believe. And certainly strengthens our faith as Christians today, reading it again. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice. So he didn't just whisper, he said where everyone can hear, he hollers this at the tomb, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave cloths. He was all wrapped up in these grave cloths like they would do to keep him from stinking too early, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him and let him go. And many of the Jews which came to Mary had seen the things which Jesus did, believed on him. And then we won't read any further about these Pharisees, but we find out later they used this to attack Jesus and even to attack Lazarus as well, the one who had been healed. I want to notice a couple of things before I close out this evening about this account of Lazarus being raised from the dead we just read. First of all, verse 43, Jesus spoke, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. You know, they're at what we would call a cemetery. There's other dead bodies there. It doesn't say this here, but I just wonder, they've heard this before, I wonder if there's a reason he called him by name. What do you think would have happened? What do you think might have happened if Jesus, the Son of God, would have said, come forth? Every one of them might have got up and came out of the grave. He certainly had the power to do so. But he said, Lazarus, come forth. He was there to raise Lazarus out of that tomb. And he did so that everyone could believe. And they certainly, their faith, if they didn't believe before, they believed then. If they already were believing in him, as Mary and Martha and Lazarus probably was, their faith was certainly strengthened by this. And to prepare them for things to come. The other thing I wanted to point out is he's dead, and now he's raised to life. You know, what was wrong with him before? I don't know. Whatever it was a sickness that was going to kill someone. It was some kind of sickness that he wasn't going to recover from because he didn't. You think about the miracle Jesus worked here. He raised him from the dead. As soon as he did so, whatever sickness that was in Lazarus' body was also gone. He didn't wake up with this sickness that made him that caused him to die. He didn't wake up stinking, I would imagine, he came back to life. He was no longer stinking just a moment ago because his body was right. As a body does, anybody does. Decomposing may be a better word for that. But here Jesus raises him and performs this miracle. And look at the people who believe on him, however many were there. Although others did not believe despite the miracle that he worked, just as they often did. Well, this evening, as we come to a close, if there's anyone here who has a need from the brethren this evening, or needs to reflect on something, or prayers, or anything at all, you have an opportunity to come as we stand and sing.